Welcome to the Ascend Growth AI podcast. I'm Nikki, and today I'm joined with Jordan Rogove and Wayne Norbeck, respected industry leaders with DXA Studio. They both bring deep expertise in architecture and experience-driven design. Their unique approach has taken them to remarkable places and allowed them to work on highly instrumental projects, from high-end, high-performing buildings with integrated wellness components to affordable housing initiatives designed with real purpose and impact. Together, we'll explore their journeys, leadership philosophies, and how thoughtful design, streamlined implementation, and the use of AI are shaping the future of architecture, affordability, and how spaces serve the people who use them. Welcome, Jordan and Wayne.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here, Nikki.
Yeah, great to be here.
To start us, tell us about DXA Studio and your personal journeys to founding it. What inspired its creation and how has the firm evolved over time?
Yeah, so we started DXA. We just went into our 15th year. It still feels like we just opened our doors, so it's hard to believe that it's been that long. Wayne and I went to school together at Virginia Tech. We continue to both teach down there as affiliate professors. After graduation, we ran into each other in Union Square, and we're both working for pretty prominent firms in the city and started hanging out and moonlighting and doing competitions and winning most of the competitions we entered. So there was a kind of a clear connection, and the success of those early endeavors made it pretty obvious that we had a good rapport with one another and that we could go places as a studio. And so we started a studio after we got quite a bit of publicity on, in particular, housing for post-earthquake Haiti from that earthquake in 2010. So 2011, we spent a lot of time down there and actually started this practice in which we did a lot of residential work in New York City and then kind of complemented that with a lot of the pro bono type work, starting in Haiti and then expanding into Africa and across the globe. So it's kind of taken off since then. Have work all over the place. More recently, we've turned our attention to more domestic type issues, in particular the affordability crisis in the US, but then we also got pulled into disaster relief. We recently completed installation of over 100 houses in Maui for the Lahaina fire survivors. So that it's been great that our office is kind of doing that type of work, but then doing some of the most incredible high-end residential projects in New York City. And then that's expanded up and down the East Coast and now out to the West Coast. So it's a great kind of distribution of our time and attention between the architecture that you might learn in school to the potential for architecture to serve humanity and provide more dignified housing for people that otherwise couldn't afford it.
That's an amazing scope of business, you guys, and not everybody has the capacity to do that from a heart perspective as well as from a business perspective. That's amazing.
We like to say that our pro bono side of the office is blown up. It's just taken off.
Yeah. But it is very rewarding. It's a good balance to have. And we really treat these projects very equally in terms of importance and the amount of attention and trying to come up with dignified and appropriate and really meaningful solutions for the different types of work. And then it continues to go. Like we have an opportunity to do a project in Guyana for some housing related to the construction of a new hospital program down there. We have a soccer academy that we're working on in Cameroon, and that has an education component. It's really great to have that balance of sort of high-end New York City and in the U.S. kind of work, and then also that humanitarian and national focus.
On a side note, do you have the same sourcing department, or do you have different departments for sourcing?
Yeah, I think for the disaster relief projects in particular, we have like scoured the globe for inexpensive but really particularly resilient materials, things that can take a beating. Because our paradigm for disaster relief is different. We looked at like FEMA's response to disasters prior to like really getting architects involved, and they leaned on manufacturers of those 3-season like trailers, like weekenders. And after Katrina, you see that sometimes that the initial disaster relief period, typically of FEMA, about 18 months, can extend for decades. I mean, you had a lot of people in New Orleans that were living in trailers for, upwards of 15 years.
Wow.
And we felt that that's a totally insufficient response. Do much better to provide housing that's built with the same standard as traditional construction of like a 30-year life cycle and actually reuse that. So the user gets the benefit in having more dignified, like a true home, to start the healing process and not be arrested for 15 years. Government agencies like FEMA have the benefit of, it might cost 30% more, but as an upfront cost, but we can redeploy it. So we're saving a tremendous amount of money as well. So in that scenario, everybody wins. And I think that's what we brought to the table when we first started working in the disaster relief space. And it seems to have resonated. And the project that we did in Hawaii was tremendously successful to the point where FEMA has talked about deploying in many other places. And so we're kind of early stages. Most notably, we're looking in the state of California following those wildfires. And it's a lengthy process sometimes after a disaster for all the remediation, the rebuild of infrastructure, and the flow of government funding to make happen, which is even more complicated in today's political environment.
What were some of the biggest turning points that shaped your path as leaders in architecture and design?
I think when we got started, we ended up winning a competition for health-focused housing in Haiti. And that was a big shift for us in terms of direction and the types of clientele and consultants and so forth that we were linked up with. Almost simultaneously, we got our first project, which was 7 Harrison Street in Tribeca. Both of those were really transformative moments because we got to work on a very high-end New York City condo project coming out of that sort of 2008 recession period. And then coupled that with this sort of humanitarian work, it really set us off in terms of the focus of the studio. The project in Tribeca, I think, picked up on a lot of history, especially Jordan's had prior to that with landmarks preservation and historic preservation of the city, coupling that with contemporary architectural interventions. That's been something that has really followed us for the last 15 years and types of projects that we're doing here as well.
Yeah, I think for me, what Wayne identified is probably a turning point for DXA. But me personally, I was in Chicago and there was an absolutely beautiful building that was being considered to be torn down, built in the 1940s by Daniel Burnham's sons. And it had, I think, been antiquated by these kind of small column bays that nobody quite knew what to do with it. So there were petitions to tear it down. And the firm I was working for, our principal, said that would be a tragedy. Let's come up with a game plan. And we drew up plans to convert it into a hotel, hit the streets, found a development partner, and it became the Hard Rock Hotel, the first urban Hard Rock venture, and saved the building from demolition and kind of a critical part of Chicago's history. And I think just having that as an example, like right out of school, that an architect doesn't have to wait for clients to come to them, that if there's a cause that they deem worthy enough, they can pursue it and create the opportunity. And that lesson kind of served the very examples that Wayne was sharing, where architects can do a lot. And I think in this country in particular, I had the good fortune to be an architect in France for a little while. And it's a revered profession. I mean, you're not treated like a janitor like you are in the U.S. It's because we're really educated and we can bring a lot of value to projects. And in the cases of some of the projects we did in Africa, we can save lives with design. And so just understanding what an architect is capable of, but also understanding that not everybody else understands it, and that it's kind of imperative for us to push our involvement to try to make the world a better place, because we have that ability with our skill set.
I imagine that with that much education and that kind of exposure, you're probably a dream for an engineer. Like, you've had so much experience in different ways that probably you're pre-thinking all the things the engineer would probably be trying to change about your designs right out the gate.
Well, I would say nobody likes architects. The clients like to beat us up. Engineers don't like to work that hard. They're accustomed to just saying no to everything. No is the engineer's favorite word. They don't like us because we push them to try to, they'll come in, they'll be like, this column needs to be 30 inches by 30 inches. And we'll be like, we'll give you 8 inches by 10 inches. You got to make it work. They're like, there's no way. You're like, come on, man. And so so they don't like us, right, Wayne? They don't like
Yeah.
us.
Most of the time we get like a column layout or something like that. We're just like, okay, you guys could try one more time on this at least. So,
Yeah.
But in this case, you guys can go back and say, we saw it in France. We were
There
able
you
to
go.
do it in Haiti. And so
Right.
then you have some leverage
Yeah.
over them, right?
Yep, that's true. And we rub that in their face as much as possible.
When you look back at your climb to where you are today, what experiences most prepared you for running the firm like DXA?
I think really prepared is the best because having known now what it really takes to get here and all the different things that we've been through, it's like, wow, it's a lot. So I think it was sort of just being able to jump in with a lot of passion at the beginning and just being smart about it, trying to do as much research as we could with meeting with people who had been through it before and help to create successful offices and so forth. But I guess it's really that the sort of drive and the passion of doing really high quality work and having that be the guiding light and then everything else kind of falling in and being willing to open to a lot of advice along the way was really quite critical.
Yeah, I'd second that. We had a lot of help along the way in the form of mentors. I worked with Morris Adjemi, who was Aldo Rossi's partner here in the U.S., getting Aldo's projects built. And Richard Gluckman, that Wayne works with, has been an awesome mentor. They've taught us so much. And then the mentorship goes back further. Growing up, I had grandparents that had served in the war and been through World War II. You learn a lot from people that have been through a lot. It makes everything else pretty trivial when you realize the struggles that preceded us. I think it helps you maintain perspective even when things go crazy wrong or get super challenging, as they have, like in the pandemic for the industry. I think in our careers, we've seen 3 cycles where most of our friends get laid off. The architecture workforce drops to less than half in a matter of a few months. Maintaining perspective throughout that and having a network of support have been the kind of critical factors.
How do you feel like your leadership style has evolved over these last 15 years?
I think there's a cultural difference because, like, when we came up, everybody yelled. It was like, you know what I mean?
Well,
That was like that Wall Street movie where everyone's crazy and like hopped up on caffeine. And, I think there's a beauty to everyone chilling out a little bit and being more civil to each other in the workplace. Now, that civility definitely doesn't extend into the internet and across television. But in the workplace, I think it's super beneficial that was no longer acceptable. It's far more constructive to maintain composure and have disagreements, but talk through them and work through, because it's a really challenging profession. Can go wrong, a lot does go wrong, and you just take all that unknown and you work through it. You chip away at it a little bit each day. I think architects are problem solvers. Part of it probably is maturity, but another part of it's cultural advancement. I think we have evolved and we've become much better at what we do through the years.
We try to take advantage of competitions, where we could enter a competition. We didn't have like a client per se that we were reporting back to for these different things, and use that as a mechanism to get some of the younger staff like a lot more freely involved in the development project. And that's been really good because not only do we have that kind of staff input, we've also explored these interesting partnerships outside of the office in terms of consultants and relationships, and that all gets mixed together. And so that's been an interesting way of promoting people within the office and allowing them to take on a little bit more than they might normally be able to in a client situation where the stakes are a bit higher. But it is a thing. It's like you got to balance sort of discipline of getting the work done, also creating an environment where people can evolve and really contribute in a meaningful way to the development design and the thinking that the office is doing. So.
When you're doing projects, do you use the local engineers, the local people for doing your sourcing? And so you do your part of the work maybe here in the States, but you're partnering with people overseas.
I think going back to that first Haiti project that Wayne mentioned, we felt really strongly that it shouldn't be a matter of building something on the mainland and then shipping it down there, that you can get all sorts of benefits by employing both local labor, local materials. We found a lot, like the lion's share of the materials that we needed within like a 20-mile radius in Haiti. I mean, that's kind of misleading because 20 miles can feel like 10,000 miles given the quality of roads and infrastructure there. But most of the materials were locally sourced. Fer forgé, which is like a tradition with cast and wrought iron. We found artisans nearby. We found suppliers of all the different materials that made up the houses that we designed for the location. And we thought that brings employment, that puts money back into the economy, that helps recovery beyond just the built environment. And so that was kind of our model down there. In large part, that extends to our efforts now. We worked with a local contractor in Hawaii. So even though we were making that in the mainland, and in that instance, it's a little different, there just simply isn't the labor on the island of Maui to rebuild 2,200 houses in a year. And so building it offsite made sense there. And then using a local team to help install varies depending on a number of different specific considerations for each project. But yeah, I would say a goal is to try to engage the place where we're designing for as much as possible. It's always for the benefit of the project and something that's important for all of our projects.
Wayne, did you find yourself pleasantly surprised about the caliber of people or the intelligence that you would come across in these countries as you're sourcing or working with them?
Oh, yeah. We had great experiences. Like we did a project in Namibia where we were hooked up with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, and they were funded through the Gates Foundation. We produced a sort of design book that would help prevent the infiltration of mosquitoes in housing along the northern border of Namibia. We produced a design book, and then we went over and met with 1220 construction technicians and held classes on how to do things and what the ideas were, the concepts behind how to improve the housing. Through those sessions, we learned a lot from those guys. And then we ended up going out into the field with folks from the Clinton side, but also the local construction folks, and even the people that were living there. And you get input from everybody, and it's totally valuable. I think what I sort of gained from that was just thinking about it less in terms of sort of higher education or less education, but more about just different experiences, like a different way of living, a different way of approaching the world. And it's all just like equally valuable in how you're coming up with solutions. And oftentimes they're coming up with things that are readily deployable that maybe we didn't think about back here in New York. So it's definitely a great experience for us.
Who's the ideal client for DXA Studio today, especially when it comes to what you're doing?
I think we actually have a couple of them right now that come to us because we're DXA Studio. They're not coming to us because we're an architect, and they just need an architect that they actually want kind of our vision. And that relationship kind of continues into the client having a lot of confidence to allow us to take them to completely unexpected place with design, and just being willing to allow us to dream big for them. And it is so fun to do that, especially for some of the private clients where, you know, this is their biggest investment. This is a space that's going to help transform or enhance their life. And to see their excitement as we present, you know, sometimes pretty wild ideas, their excitement's palpable, and it feeds us. You know, my brother's a musician, and he had just a beautiful reciprocation of the energy that he puts out in the world almost immediately. For architects, it's much different, that we create something and it might take 2 or 3 or more years to get built. And by that point, you're on to the next project and you're not getting that feedback. And so these relationships where we have great clients that get excited about it, that's our kind of reciprocation. That's the analog to my brother's audience for his shows. And yeah, it just means a lot. You've got somebody that is invested in your design process and supportive and enthusiastic.
What geographic areas are you currently serving?
So we have a wide range. I mean, we still have the bulk of our work in the New York City area, but we also have work up in Vermont and, you know, upstate New York. We're doing some work in Georgia. We're involved in a housing study in Texas, project out in Phoenix and in Santa Monica, California, and I'm sure there's Virginia. So we're kind of starting to get all over the place. And it's been interesting because a lot of that came from word of the mouth connections with people who were working for one developer that we were working with. Then the group split off, and then somebody ended up in Atlanta, and then somebody ended up out with So it's been really interesting to see the whole network kind of evolve and move all over the country.
What trends do you see happening in your industry right now in architecture?
I see a lot of investment in trying to streamline of our practice with AI, which is interesting. It's kind of in the early stages, so we have to see where that goes. But for some of the more menial, entry level type tasks, that could be made significantly easier, more efficient with the presence of AI. So that's kind of on the practice side. What that means for aspiring architects in school now, I think that goes across just about every profession, right? Like those entry level jobs and what impact that'll have. Far as kind of outwardly, like beyond the studio, there's certainly been a big push given the devaluation of commercial buildings and properties to try to convert those into residential to take on the affordability in housing crisis. I think that's certainly interesting. It's clear that the more housing we build, the more kind of stabilized or less expensive the remaining inventory is. And that certainly moves the needle with affordability. Those are big things. We personally have been lobbying Congress on a couple of bills that are scheduled to be on the floor shortly that we think will help modular get streamlined to a point where that can be a tool in the battle for affordable housing. But I think housing is kind of at the forefront of both the political spectrum, and a lot of our development partners are looking at it like, how do you make this pencil out so that everybody wins with bringing more affordable housing to realization? So those are kind of the big things. Wayne, can you think of any other big
I
trends
think
here?
coming out of the pandemic, there's a focus on health and wellness in a lot of our projects.
Yeah.
Like really great gyms and spas and yoga meditation rooms, that kind of thing, shared amenities like that. And then also integrating work from home spaces into housing developments and into individual units or single family houses as well, where it's not just having an extra bedroom. It could also be really carefully integrating a desk setup along a hallway or something like that, so that people have the ability to both work at the office but also back at the house. I think those are some of the trends we've seen start to pop up. A lot of interest in those types of things in the last few years.
I agree with that. If you could wave a magic wand and have AI powered system integrated into your business tomorrow, what would it be?
An HR AI robot.
Like automated payment collection.
Something that allows us to spend more work on research and design. That's where the heart is. The kind of typical daily business concerns of management and that sort of thing. To the extent that AI could assist with all of that and allow us to focus on what we're most passionate about, that would be awesome.
How many people work underneath of you right now?
20, 22, 23, somewhere in there. We, at the beginning of the pandemic, we're in the mid to high 30s. One of the trends that hasn't been so positive is that projects don't seem to be as linear and continuous as they were pre-pandemic. I think a lot of that has to do with less favorable construction financing, access to capital, delays caused in the approval processes. So we are balancing a lot more pauses in projects than we're accustomed to. That's just been an unfortunate reality of the past 5 years at this point. There's always signs that everything's going to pick back up, but I think the political uncertainty last year with the general election, some significant and very positive zoning changes in New York City, but not knowing when those were going to take effect or if they'd be ratified. And now interest rates, economy, there's always, ever since the start of the pandemic, there's been a high degree of uncertainty that I think might not have been there before, that allowed things to move with greater fluidity, which generally made practice of architecture a little bit easier than it does now.
Is there anything that you feel that AI could be used for when it comes to attracting customers, improving lead flow, or capturing lost opportunities?
I think so. Like there's a whole network RFPs that get released, and in the past it's been challenging to find a single resource that can sort of uncover those quickly. So That's one area that I could see where you're able to access that information much more quickly than you were in the past and weed through what makes sense and what doesn't make sense based on our own criteria, something like that. I could see AI being very beneficial for it.
Yeah, I think zoning of properties, being able to do that at a much larger scale, that'll often take good investment of time for each property. If you're able to sift through billions and billions of already filed projects and the over 2,000 building codes in the United States, I think identifying opportunities is going to become significantly easier with the presence of AI. And then that connectivity with the proper people and future clients can become easier. I think there's a ton of potential in it, and we're just kind of scratching the surface of what that potential offers.
I can imagine that the building code could become quite a nightmare when you're working multi-state. That's a lot of non-crossover from county to county, let alone state to state,
Right.
city to city.
Yeah, that's so. When I mentioned we were doing lobbying, I think we identified like two really big impediments to the success of modular, because we've always seen modular as the next big thing, but people have been saying that for, 50 plus years. So we identified kind of the biggest things that were holding it back. One was the cost of transportation, which we think we solved with our hybrid system that's partially volumetric and partially kind of flat packed, like panelized. So it can ship on standard flatbeds and reduce the cost of shipping sixfold. So that makes it, I think, appreciably more achievable for people and a big tool in making it more affordable. But the larger impediment is really that like Byzantine maze of different building codes that every municipality has kind of adopted these small revisions to it in the name of improving the code or making it more specific to their location. But what it actually does is it prevents any mass production of modular in advance of a building approval. And those approvals are wildly divergent. And then we have some places where those approvals could be anywhere between 2 and 4 years. And then we have other places where it could be between 2 and 4 days. But each one requires taking what's effectively a product with modular housing and turning it into a project. Like you've got to tweak the design for each municipality. And so we look at our European colleagues, especially in Scandinavia, where they nationalize their building. They've got a single building code, which allows them to build housing in a higher volume. And in that higher volume, there's massive savings on the labor and material sides. By our estimates, if we could cut all the red tape and just have a regional approval process across the US, because we've got much more divergent environmental considerations with the different climate zones than they might have in Europe, you could save upwards of about 30 cents on the dollar, not changing everything and making it customized for each site. Because that's where we are right now. We are no better than we were in the 50s and 60s when we showed up and dropped all the materials up and started swinging hammers, where every other industry, other construction, has found a way for things to cost 10% of what they costed in the 1960s.
It'd be really neat if that could be the case. And like with your guys' talent to be able to make a designer kitchen and be able to do it modularly where everybody who's having affordable living can still have this designer style kitchen as opposed to just the plain Jane basic kitchen, because you can mass produce it and get all of the neat stuff in it that creates so many of it that they end up with something, super neat, and they can match the people with money. Because there is something nice to not come into something vanilla because that's all you could afford. But because you could regionalize it, get better pricing on it, they can have something unique and they can paint it their own colors or have their couple different styles of tile, but yet still have something that's feels more high end, because it does do a lot for how you feel when you walk in your house.
100%. And that is, if we didn't mention it previously, we started a modular company, and that's what led to the project in Maui. It's called Live Connected. And the idea is to bring high design into the realm of affordability, not too different from like Target or IKEA, like just trying to bring it to a price point that most people can afford. And then you can benefit from really thoughtful design that does provide that kind of like dignified experience that might not otherwise be affordable. And so, in our opinion, modular is the vehicle to do that. We're able to build in locations with low overhead and lower labor prices than anything that we have on the East or West Coast, where construction might be $500 or $800 a square foot, and we can build in the $100 to $200 range. That opens the door to a lot of people that don't currently qualify for mortgages or can't afford their homes, which is a majority of the population at this point.
That's right. Plus, I think people really need to have the education that that product is actually a stronger, more sturdy product anyway.
Yep.
And if they don't understand that that's actually what you do want.
That's exactly right. When you build in a factory, you generate a fraction of the waste, so it's far more sustainable. And then the quality is pretty much guaranteed in a controlled environment. You don't have issues with mold and mildew or any of those precision issues that happen when the building is exposed for upwards of 8 months to a year to the elements. So it's much better. Agreed.
If you could go back to your younger self before entering this industry, what would you tell yourself?
I think doing what we do, architecture, I've had so many people say that you might be the only person that really loves their job that I know. And, I think that's because every day is different. We're not caught in this mechanical, repetitive thing that every project, every client, every opportunity is so wildly different that it requires you to learn a new skill set and almost reinvent yourself a little bit. I think we pride ourselves in that our architecture and design, no two projects look alike. I mean, you can see common threads and common areas of exploration, but that evolution, that every situation calling for a different response leads to continued self-improvement and learning and all the things that make you feel young and happy. And so I do differently. Pretty happy with the way this has gone and pretty excited by the stuff on the horizon for us. That's pretty great. So I don't know, Wayne, if you feel different.
I think having the mentality of really opening yourself up to any kind of opportunity that comes along. We've had so many things that have come in that are very different in terms of care. We've really moved away from this idea of specializing as a company and being open to opportunities and taking on many different types of projects. That kind of open-minded approach has been amazing for us, the way it's spun into different types of things that we're working on, whether it's like modular housing front or the international work. And you never know, the clients cross paths in really unexpected ways. And so I think it's having that kind of open-mindedness about how things can go and being able to embrace the different opportunities, even if there might be challenges along the way, like that kind of thinking would be, what I impart what that wisdom on like the younger generation as they think about maybe entering into this profession or whatever profession they're considering.
When you think back over the last 5 or 10 years, what would you say is your single biggest win?
Oh man, I cannot describe the sense of satisfaction and gratitude. 1 year ago this week, turning over the keys to the first families that had been living in a hotel room for 15 months following the Lahaina fires. Just like there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. We had an event with the governor of Hawaii, Josh Green, who was instrumental in delivering this health-focused housing instead of the trailers, which was our mantra. And fortunately, we found each other. That was just an incredible professional moment where I think the best parts of our practice were on display and clearly benefiting upwards of 400 people, 109 different families. That was pretty awesome. I've been riding that high for about a year now.
Definitely. That was so rewarding, that whole project, seeing it come together and like watching that first family move in, that was just incredibly emotional. So I would definitely second that.
What do you feel like you learned out of that experience?
A reaffirmation or affirmation of that first lesson back in Chicago, where it's, nobody's going to hand you these opportunities. You got to fight for them. And we did a lot of research and development, put our own money into a crazy idea, and it proved out. And so that kind of entrepreneurial, almost like activist side, it really feeds the opportunities for the architect side. I think just having that kind of win keeps us on a course, maybe even with a greater conviction. And as we've learned in our first years of DXA, each great project leads to an even greater one, and just keep building on that. So I think that's probably the big lesson, is that we're on the right path and that we should keep fighting.
You guys solve problems of substantial magnitude, that's for sure. What's the next big thing for you?
So I think in the continuation of those responses, like California is just like Lahaina, almost the exact same conditions that led to destruction, but at a magnitude of about 6 or 7 times when you consider the number of families that were uprooted or lost their homes. And I think trying to serve there, and in Alaska, there was recently a tsunami a few weeks ago, and just seeing if our ideas resonate there and can happen there. I think on the disaster relief side, on the architecture side, I think with these incredible clients that we just keep pushing the envelope a little bit. Like with our architecture, we like to find really innovative ways to design housing, whether it's bringing in affordable housing or it's having these kind of interesting references to the history of New York and building the next chapter of New York City. I think that's super exciting. Just like what this incredible studio that we built. I mean, we just have a wildly talented staff. I think seeing what we can do with the increasingly great opportunities that have been coming our way, it's exciting. Like I said, it'll take a couple years to see all the stuff that we're working on now in the built environment, but man, it's a lot of fun, like going for a walk in the city and saying, that's one of our babies, and really just changing the skyline in more modest ways than, some of the big, super tall buildings, but maybe even more importantly than the skyline, the streetscape, like activating and resuscitating a number of streets throughout the city. I think we had a project in Bergen, Brooklyn, which brought an entire block of the city back to life and has generated a lot of interest. Same on 28th Street. We did a project, the Maverick, that brought back a sense of vitality and New York spirit to the place. Anyway, we're having a lot of fun with all of those efforts.
I think just sort of improving or continuing to improve on the kind of quality of work that we do. I think that's always something that every project we're trying to push that, and continuing to make really meaningful places for people. We're working on this project in Africa right now and had a meeting and showed the guys some sketches, and the client was over the moon because he's trying to give back to his community and he could now suddenly see it for the first time. That was really rewarding. And I think so those things like quality, meaning, really thoughtful approaches to work and making a huge impact like that, we keep that moving forward.
How do people get in touch with you?
Well, on the architecture side, we've got a pretty great website, DXA Studio. And those that might be interested in some of the modular endeavors, that is live, connected.com. And that has a full profile. We were fortunate enough to have the New York Times put us on the cover of the art section a few weeks back. And that article by Jim Russell is going to be on there. Jim and I are going to do a presentation about it in March at the Center for Architecture. Information will be on the website shortly about that if anybody is interested and wants to come out to that.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing your insights, your vision, and your story behind DXA Studio. Your approach to design, blending technical precision with human-centered experience, is reshaping how wellness and architectural environments are built. And it's inspiring to see how your leadership is pushing the industry forward. To our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like, follow, and share the Ascend Growth AI podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode.